everyone, and welcome to this conversation. I've got the lovely Dominic with me once again. How have you been since we last spoke, Dominic?
Fantastic, really good. But looking around, still a little bit concerned about what's happening in the UK at the moment, which is what we're going to go into as a discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots has been going on, and before this, I know we've just had a really good conversation as well. So today we thought we'd talk about the Global Mind project that was released this year, and essentially it's a piece of research that's done on a global scale, looking at the mental health and well-being around the globe. So giving the top lines, and then we're just going to have a chat about it for the next maybe 15 or 20 minutes. So what did they find? Mental well-being globally and at country level has remained at its post-pandemic lows, with no signs of movement towards pre-pandemic levels. So we know that lots of people's mental health took steep declines from 2020, and there aren't any signs of it actually getting back to where it was prior to all of that fun stuff. The younger generations, particularly those under the age of 35, saw the steepest declines in their mental health and well-being, and it's still remaining very, very low. The UK are second bottom of the rankings for levels of mental well-being. So we are one above Uzbekistan. So yeah, we're not looking great in terms of our levels of mental well-being compared to the rest of the globe. And also looking at other trends. So they were looking at 18 to 24-year-olds, and they found that the younger that this group had their smartphone, the worse their mental health outcomes in adulthood. Discussion around ultra-processed foods, resulting in substantially poorer mental well-being at all ages. And then the impact of family relationships and people finding that they've not been getting along with their family. So there's been this disconnect, and that's resulted in poorer mental health outcomes there as well. So kind of lots of layers going on here, and I'm sure we could talk for hours. Dominic, what are your insights? What are your thoughts? Why is all of this happening?
There's a lot going on at the moment. Just recapping back a little bit, cost of living crisis in this country, food prices. My cleaner earlier on mentioned about her car insurance. I think it was £500. It's gone to 1,000.
Yeah.
So the percentage increase is absolutely ridiculous in all quarters of life, shall we say. And there's a famous book called Status Syndrome by Professor Michael Marmot, who did a study on communities globally and nationally in this country. And the dominant finding was that trust and community involvement goes down as inequality rises, income inequality. So what is actually happening, the social cohesion, and they call it, there's a term called social capital, which is all about trust and reciprocal actions. If you've noticed around the communities, there's a bit of a negativity bias going on. It's almost as if people are looking for trouble or running away from trouble. There's a lot going on at the moment. Are the police stations being closed for an agenda? I don't know. Because back in the day, if there were police present, that would be a deterrent for crime. I've got an ex-client who's a civil servant, and he states quite predominantly that he's sick of the intimidating atmosphere in Birmingham. That's because there isn't enough police presence. And that will start to affect people going into city centres. I know, going up north even further to Glasgow, there's a guy I follow, I won't necessarily name him, on LinkedIn, and he's talking about the emission zones all around Glasgow, which is derailing the taxi industry, derailing the nightlife industry. So the country, from the far north of Scotland down south to London, for some reason there's a negativity bias. The community seems to be fractured, and I think this is a squeeze on the cost of living, which is high demand and low control. And it's been proven during the pandemic, when we had the pandemic, that when people aren't in control of their lives, somebody else is taking control, then the mental anxiety increases. And I think, just much like a family, if the mother or father, I come from a family that was maybe dysfunctional, if the stepfather is out of control, then the family's out of control. And you've only got to look at, I'm sorry, I'll name it now, Rishi Sunak, the apparent leader of the UK. It was called Great Britain. I will probably rename it Broken Britain, because we've both got contacts across the UK, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
And our sources are telling us that communities aren't happy. You know, it's not as if Liverpool's rougher than Birmingham or London's rougher. They're all similar, and people are people, and they're all complaining about the policing that's going on nationally.
Yeah.
And it's frightening.
Yeah. It feels very fractured, doesn't it, at the moment? Yeah. And it's a really kind of sad state of affairs, and there's so much in that that you've spoken about. And, you know, it's no surprise that people's mental health took such bad declines in 2020, and that not recovering, because it's going to take years, because people's financial status was completely, for some people, you know, they lost their livelihoods, they lost their jobs, you know, then their housing was put at risk, then the cost of rents and everything up, and food and petrol, like you say, everything has just cost so much. When you talk about the emission stuff, you know, people who are poorer tend to have older cars because they can't afford new ones. Well, now we're going to tax you because you've got an older car. So it just feels like the poorer are getting poorer and getting taxed more and more and more, and they can't afford it. You know, choosing, do I heat my home or do I feed my kids? Do they remain cold or do they have full bellies? When you've got people having to make those difficult choices every single day, you kind of think, well, is it really any wonder people's mental well-being is so low? And the social side of things, I think all this stress and anxiety, people are stuck up here.
Yes.
Worried, they're thinking all the time, how am I going to get through? And then it's kind of like this inward focus to survive, isn't it? It's this kind of survival mode. But we need our community, we need our social connection. And I think I remember so many conversations, you know, with the lockdowns and everything, with how much polarization there was with different belief systems. And we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but I never remember a time in my whole life where there was so much polarization when COVID happened and lockdowns happened, and different belief systems and conspiracy theorists this and anti-vaxxers that, and so much hatred. You could see it online with people having a go at one another. And this polarization is not helpful, because we're social creatures and we need togetherness, we need belongingness, and I feel like we've lost so much, and it's going to take a lot to come back from that.
And we were chatting before, weren't we? These are all valid points, and the question is, how do we change it? We know what the problem is and the issues. We can see this. We've just covered you've covered a plethora of negativity within the UK at the moment. But how do we change it? Because, you know, I mentioned social capital. There's a very lack of social capital, which is trust and reciprocal actions and communities happy and social cohesion. I'll call it social corrosion. So, like you said, it's fractious. You know, there's no real leader, it seems to me, leading the UK out of this. And I think we mentioned earlier about the Prime Minister of this country at the moment. We mentioned his name earlier. He stated that anybody with anxiety or depression now may well have to return to work because of what he said. What did he say, Sally? Because I think you watched it.
Yeah, so I hadn't watched it live, but there was so much kind of noise about it on LinkedIn. So I thought, what's all of this talking about? And essentially, he said he wants to end the sick note culture.
Okay.
Since 2020, I can't remember the numbers and the percentages.
Yes. Yeah.
The number of people signed off work with anxiety and depression has completely skyrocketed. Yes. And essentially, we can't mistake, you know, everyday anxieties and sadness and not coming into work because of that. Let's not mix that up with anxiety and depression. And he was talking about, you know, people do have anxiety and depression. Yes, they should get the support that they need, but we also need to end the sick note culture where people just aren't working. And obviously, this isn't going to come in straight away, but that massively concerns me when you've got almost 2 million people on waiting lists trying to access mental health services for their mental health. So the services aren't there. There's now, it feels like there's now barriers being put in place for people saying, well, I am mentally unwell, but now you're making it harder potentially for me to call in sick to work. So people aren't going to feel safe to do that. So they're probably just going to go to work feeling really unwell. They're not going to, I don't know. It's just,
It's frightening, isn't it?
It's frightening. It's worrying. There is a huge disconnect. There is, from my perspective, and this is my opinion, and shoot me down. But where's the compassion? Where's the empathy? And where's the understanding coming from these top level leaders?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
When you hear, children and young people are trying to access mental health services, and those services, we've shut off our waiting lists now. There's no access to anything. So how are we ever going to come out of this if the funding isn't going into the services that are needed, and you're basically essentially potentially stigmatizing people with real mental health needs by saying you can't call in sick anymore?
Yeah, and you're right. They're going to stigmatize people who have got actual anxieties and depression, which is a debilitating disorder. And that's going to affect people in lots of different ways, whether it's social anxiety, whether it's general anxiety disorder, whether it's OCD, obsessive compulsive disorders, which are part of anxiety, by the way. Panic attacks, full-blown or lead up to panic attacks. And these are, as I know with my clients, really debilitating disorders that actually incapacitate the individual for half an hour, or it could be 6 weeks or 6 months. And we mentioned before, there's a huge waiting list to get these mental disorders treated. And it seems to me that the Prime Minister of this country is giving a word salad. And that's a word I'll throw out there, a word salad. So basically, people are bamboozled by his promises. But as far as I'm concerned, the broken promises, because I think there was a figure that we mentioned on the first podcast we had, there was so many million that was going to be put into mental health. And also there was a document, was it Stevenson and Farmer report in 2017 about thriving at work, a huge document that the government, when Theresa May was in power, was actually going to come into effect. Well, this now is almost like an undoing of that. Mental health, the decline has got worse. We both work in this industry, and we see it on a regular basis, whether professionally or personally in the community. And I feel it's about time that mental health, rather than them talking about it, the money is put into it to help treat these people. And where I am in Birmingham, the council a while ago has just declared the bankrupt. So God only knows, forgive the language, where the budget is going to go. Social services definitely are going to be affected. So that then affects the families, whether it's adopting children, children from broken homes. Because I'm from a dysfunctional family, and I tell you what, as I said before, myself and my brother were known as ACE children, adverse childhood experience children. There are thousands of those children now. I think there's a figure of around 68,000 families have to move every year, whether it's to do with domestic violence and that sort of thing. These are huge figures, and nothing seems to be done about it. And it needs really to be prioritised, because the communities will not get any better. We don't want ghetto communities.
And in that, we did mention last time about the $500 million or whatever it was, that investment, and this was challenged as part of this kind of Q&A, and what would you say to the 1.9 million people who are waiting for mental health services who can't seem to access it? And the response is, well, we are investing in mental health services at unprecedented rates, not like never before. Well, yes, and it's still not good enough. You need to take it seriously. We need the tangible outcomes of this. It's all very well saying it and answering it in a very kind of political way, but actually more needs to be done, more needs to have been done historically where it hasn't been. And yes, you might, I mean, I don't know how much truth is in it, but it's all very well saying you're investing in more, but we're not seeing the positive outcomes of that. And anecdotally on the ground, we're working with people who are trying to access services, and they share their stories all the time of, well, actually my friend went through this process, managed to get an appointment, and they said, oh, actually we can't help you, sorry, end of the road. Oh, great. Well, thanks for that. I've waited 3 months for that.
And that's the thing, isn't it? The frustration. They're already frustrated with their disorder, and they're frustrated even more because of the waiting list. But the waiting list really, no offence, there's fantastic people working in the NHS and great doctors, but the system is broken. I think I shared an article from The Guardian the other week about the pharmacies closing in the UK. That's the sharp end of the community where they go to get prescriptions, etc., etc. And some people rely on the prescriptions, and on that operative word prescription, I'm not stating, and I agree with medication, but SSRIs, the antidepressants for people to alleviate symptoms, okay? It treats the symptom short term, but it doesn't treat the cause. Because again, as you know, the unconscious mind is where it's at. The unconscious mind controls people automatically every day in their relationships, health and wealth / career. The biggest relationship they've got with themselves, and they could be carrying traumas from childhood into adulthood. And medication will help, but that's only meant to be short term. It's not meant to be long term. So almost, in my opinion, that's like putting sand in the road. And if you're a keen driver like I am, you need tarmac. You need proper substance to support on that note. These people need proper support. Medication is meant to be short term. So there needs to be more, the hypnotherapy, the CBT, talking therapies provided for people out there to actually help them unravel and help with the self-talk, which is a big thing. People aren't aware of this. And I'll just bring it up now briefly. People talk to themselves around 65,000 times a day. If the public are aware, I'm not sure. And guess what? They're only aware of 7,000 of those thoughts consciously. So the rest, and I sat at the back of the maths class, 58,000 thoughts are buffering, causing you to act automatically. And then you're in another toxic relationship, then your health suffers, then you have a financial loss, and you think, oh my God, how did I get here? But they don't understand how the mind works. It's unconscious, it's automatic. And the powers that be should be spreading this information, because when you understand how you work, then maybe we can do something about it. Rather than buying the latest, sorry, DFS sofa, consumerism. Let's do a bit of retail therapy. Or liquid therapy in the UK. That's the go-to with UK, I'm afraid. I'm not a prude, but, alcohol, I guarantee, is the ruination of all families. It's okay in moderation, but it's the go-to. And I guarantee to our listeners that if you're drinking alcohol through no fault of your own, the next day you're going to wake up with double the problem. And people need to be helped with addictions as well. Because of their mental health, and that's not being addressed.
No, and the services are really lacking, and I think there's so much stigma around addiction and alcohol dependency and things like that. But these are really difficult illnesses that people have to try and manage and navigate through, and the support isn't there. And again, I have people coming on my courses, and we talk about alcohol dependency as a mental health condition that requires full treatment, just like depression would, or bipolar disorder, or whatever it might be. And people sharing with me, well, when they've gone to get treatment, they've said alcohol dependency isn't a mental health condition. What? I'm sorry. This person needs help.
It's two sides of the coin, isn't it? And it's unfortunate that this is going on. So it's one of those. Maybe the next podcast we will come back with bullet points on how to change this. I don't know whether we should come up with a couple of tips now.
I think it might be good to end on a positive. Let's end on a positive, because I feel like I've actually ranted quite a lot in the last 20 minutes, and we've talked lots about the problems and, the lay of the land and the landscape and what things are looking like. So, are there a couple of things that we can try to do to support ourselves or help others or tackle it? What are your thoughts?
One of my top tips, I always go back to breath work, and that's breathing correctly, which is rather than breathe from the chest, the thoracic region, which will cause more anxiety, depression, blood pressure, is to breathe from the belly, called parasympathetic breathing. And if our listeners want to know how to do that, you'll inhale through your nose for 3 seconds, push the belly out, hold your breath for 4 seconds, then exhale through the mouth for 5 seconds. Regular repeated exposure and practice of breath work like this will help your anxiety reduce, help you become calmer and feel more in control. One other tip, social prescription. Try and get with a group. Domino's group, card group, not betting, obviously, a walking group. Try and join a group in the community. Get out there and mix.
Lovely. Social connection sounds great. And that breath work's so good for both your physical and your mental health, right?
Yes, definitely.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Dominic. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me. Speak soon.
Catch up soon. Cheers.